Welcome to Mid-Maryland Votes. Our guest, Dustin Bane, is a father whose nonverbal special needs son was abused by a teacher, while warnings were raised and ignored. The teacher has since been arrested and is awaiting trial for multiple offenses involving children. Dustin is now an advocate for the most vulnerable students, demanding safeguards like classroom cameras and other protections he says were denied again and again. This is a hard conversation, but it's one that must be heard right here on Mid-Maryland Votes. Now let's get into it. Welcome to Mid-Maryland Votes. I am your host, Mark Flynn. With me is my co-host,
Ethan Lowen.
And we have a very special guest tonight. We have Dustin Bane, who's a parent of a special needs child. Dustin, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Kind of brings you here this evening is there's an incident that occurred, a very tragic incident actually that occurred, and it involved your son. If you could explain kind of what the situation is that kind of caused you to become an activist in the Frederick County community.
So it kind of happened in two phases. Back in 2017, my son was diagnosed with autism, and we put him, or actually it would have been 2015, he was diagnosed with autism. In 2017, he was in a program called the Expressions Program at Carroll Manor Elementary School. And he came home one day and he had a bruise in the center of his back, bigger than the size of my fist. And there was no answers for it. No one even told me about an incident at school. On both of his shoulders, there was also deep scratches, so as if his shoulders had been held down also. And I had no answers for it. So I reached out to the school system, and I reached the principal and the assistant principal and the special ed coordinator, had meetings with all of them, and they had no answers for me. They said they had no idea, that they didn't see an incident. And the bruising was definitely something significant enough that the child would have been crying for a significant amount of time. It would have been, even if it was falling off of playground equipment, which I understand, kids get bumps and bruises. It would have been crying significantly. There would have been a report known about it. And so I didn't get any answers there, and I didn't really know what to do. I was new to the school system, and they kind of swept me under the rug. And about a year later, not even a year, about 6 months later, I found out about another investigation that they were under by the Frederick Sheriff's Department of a abuse allegation on one of the teachers that was working there. And they actually had an eyewitness. The aides from that classroom had given testimony on abuse that was occurring in that same Carroll Manor program. And so it was horrible things. There was a child that was very sensitive to noises, which is very common with autism spectrum disorders, is sensory processing issues. And he was afraid of the refrigerator, and the teacher would threaten him with stuffing him in the refrigerator if he didn't act right or was acting up, or he would take kids' food from him. Now, these were all accusations from an aide that was in the classroom. Obviously, the victims cannot speak for themselves. They're all nonverbal children in these self-contained classrooms. So,
and just to clarify, Dustin, with your son, do you feel comfortable sharing his name with us?
Yeah, sure. My son's Ashton.
And Ashton's nonverbal. So
Ashton's level 2 autism spectrum disorder and nonverbal. Yes,
he can't even speak up for himself.
No, and one of the biggest problems is in the misunderstanding between teachers and myself and such. And I try to explain to them is when Ashton gets off the bus, if he's crying or there's something wrong with him, I have no way of knowing what occurred. He doesn't understand what's happening. He can't tell me what's happening. Whereas every other parent, the child comes off the bus, they're crying, they're upset. They can ask him, hey, what happened? And, little Billy can say, well, Johnny made fun of me in school. And they understand, okay, I can talk to them and, having a little conversation with Billy and let him know that everything's going to be fine and no big deal. Or they say something significant happened, like a teacher grabbed them by the neck. And, okay, now I need to talk to the school system. They have the way of figuring out that information, whereas I have no way of figuring out that information.
But you would think once the accusations from that aide were made, that would cause basically an emergency situation, I guess I would think.
And to my knowledge, it did. I mean, it did get reported because the aide I presume because they knew they wasn't going to go away, and she made a pretty big stink about it, and it went to the sheriff's department, and there was an investigation. But the parents they never told us anything about it. The rest of the parents in that classroom and the students never knew anything about this until a solid 9 months later. And then I get this notification that there was an investigation. They ended up not prosecuting because they didn't have a victim that could speak for themselves, basically. So there was no way to actually prosecute it. And when I found that out, and it was happening at the exact same time that I had presented them with the bruises on my son, it made me realize, okay, that they didn't want anyone to find out about me. Like, we were already under investigation. We got problems going on. We don't want them to find out about this situation. So those pictures never made it to, like, they're all mandatory reporters. They should have reported it to CPS. CPS should have been involved, gotten a notification of this incident, reviewed the situation to see, because, for all they know, it's me being the abuser, and I'm saying they're the abuser, and no one knows, but this kid definitely has a massive bruise on his back. It needs to be reported to CPS so that they can get to the root of it. None of that occurred. They didn't want that to occur, in my mind, because they had a situation that they needed to resolve in regards to another accusation that was in the sheriff's office. So that's my perception there. And that's what steered me to start looking for, what do I do to protect my son? And then I ran into a Facebook group called Maryland Parents for Cameras in Classrooms. And so I contacted them. We got engaged with a couple people there and found out they were working on a bill to put forward at the state level. And that's when I first became engaged with the idea of getting these cameras in the special needs classrooms to be the voice for the children that can't speak for themselves. That was the initial situation that occurred. And then more recently, a much more serious, obvious situation has unfolded.
The year that this occurred again was what year?
2018, like 17, 18 was when the situation was going on at Carroll Manor.
And your son was how old at that time?
So he was born in 2013. So he was in the 4 or 5 year old range.
There's another incident that is currently occurring in the Frederick County Public Schools of sexual abuse in the Brunswick High School, involving other students, not necessarily teachers, but other students. And it seems to, at this point, seems to be a very similar situation where there hasn't been any, no one held accountable. And this is going on since last school year. So what you're describing is almost a repeated cycle of behavior, which is incredibly disturbing.
Yeah. So, and as far as that situation is concerned, I'm pretty familiar with that because also, as we discussed previously, I'm a cadet wrestling coach at Frederick High School. So those type of allegations in situations with sports programs, obviously, make their way across to other sports teams so that we can make sure that my kids are not doing any type of that kind of hazing or any type of issues that could go that far that cause those kind of problems. And
just for the clarification of our viewers, the Brunswick situation involved the lacrosse team over there.
Correct. Yes.
And as far as you know, have you heard of any consequences for the behavior that had occurred?
I'm not familiar with any consequences. There has been, I know at Frederick High, we have different procedures in place as far as locker rooms and our wrestling practices and such that's kind of been somewhat of a potential fall, from that situation. So there has been adjustments internally at our school for our programs to make sure nothing like that occurs. But I know nothing about as far as actual consequences towards the Brunswick side of things.
Now, Dustin, the schools maintain that while there's an investigation in progress, their legal counsel tells them that they cannot comment on the case whatsoever. That anything that they say about the case while it's under investigation could disrupt the investigation itself and lead to lawsuits and other situations. What's your feeling on that?
I'm sure they're being told to do that by their lawyers, and I can understand the logic behind pieces of that. But in the situation like where my son had an injury and he's at a school that a known accuser is at, or a known person that has been accused of assault is at. That should have provoked them not to sweep me under the carpet. That should have provoked them to say, okay, there's substantial reasons to believe that this could be related, and we need to discuss this. We even if they don't tell me directly, hey, this other guy is being accused at your same school, maybe he did it. They don't need to go into that type of description to still be able to proactively protect my child.
And you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to put those pieces together.
Right. Yeah.
You have a nonverbal child that's showing up with major injuries on their body, and you have a teacher's aide who's reporting a teacher for physical abuse, or at the very least emotional and verbal abuse. You don't have to be Andy Sipowicz from NYPD Blue to figure that one out.
And that's what the accusation essentially is from many parents there in Brunswick, as well as what you're referring to, that the school system, the administrators are not being forthcoming with families, not being forthcoming with the community. And as a result, there seems to be a trend where it is increasing the danger that children are in as a result of that secrecy.
Yeah. I definitely have seen a culture in place that does look to protect internally at all costs. And matter of fact, several of the administrators and that were at Carroll Manor have all been promoted to other higher up positions since then. None of them were actually, the same principal is still there from that original accusation. She also happened to be the person that hired John McAleer, and she's still in place. Which is, so that brings us to the second situation. So started advocating heavily for the cameras in classrooms, and went to the state delegation to give my testimony, and we put forth a bill in the House that got through the House, passed the House, and got to the Senate. And Paul Pinsky was the head of the committee that had control over that bill. And even though it had passed so in a bipartisan fashion through the House, he didn't let it hit the floor. And to my understanding, he is a former teacher and backed significantly by the union, and just was not going to let that bill reach the floor for a vote. So all that effort and all that money and time was spent, and nothing, no fruits from it. And it was pretty disheartening to put that much effort into something and to try and protect our most vulnerable children, and to have it just shut down, not even to get a vote.
And what year did you work on this?
So this would have been first in 2020, and then again in 2022, 2023. And so there was another situation in 2022 that all kind of correlated to this. So there was the first situation I had at Carroll Manor, started advocating for cameras, got shut down the first time. Then in 2022, when the DOJ report came out citing multiple cases of abuse due to restraint and seclusion of special needs children in Frederick County Public Schools, and they canned Teresa Albin with a great, wonderful golden,
Golden parachute.
Yeah. And so she gets fired and sent away. And then they,
I looked at a huge severance package, I might add.
Yes, huge severance package. And then I looked at that as an opportunity. Okay, one, it's a terrible thing to find out about how much abuse is truly going on in these special needs programs. But two, there's momentum here. There's noise. It's public. There's a superintendent being fired. So let's get out in front. Let's get public again. I spoke to a bunch of news stations, spoke at the board meetings a couple of times, spoke to Delegate Guyton, who was the one that put that bill out again. We got the bill back in for that session. And I also had the Frederick County Board of Education promising me, and the acting superintendent promising me, a pilot for the cameras that very following year, which would have been the fall of 2023. And they originally said they could do it without the union's approval, that there didn't need to be negotiations, that they could find the money and they could put the pilot in place without that. That was between the acting superintendent and the Board of Education, and I had enough people on the board agreeing with me at that time that they would do this pilot. The teachers union said no. They said the only way that they would support it is if a program 100% volunteered for it. Okay, like they didn't know that no teachers were going to stick their hands up and say, yes, put a camera, on me first. And so no teachers obviously volunteered. And then the teachers union said, so we're not doing this. And they shut it down.
We talk about the teachers union fairly regularly with individual guests talking about why the public schools are the way that they are. And it is hard for an average person, to kind of understand, to visualize the role that the teachers union plays when individuals talk about it. From your perspective, how would you describe? So it's kind of shocking that the teachers union would be making a decision when we have elected representatives who legally run the school system. The teachers union has no legal or elected authority to run our public schools. What are you referring to when you say that, when you were told that the teachers union is essentially in charge of this decision?
For instance, there was a meeting last week between FCPS admin and the teachers union, FCTA, on these cameras. Now that this new situation has happened, which I'm sure we'll get way more into, they met as far as this camera is concerned. So the negotiations don't even include the Board of Education. The board members weren't even in that meeting. The negotiations are between the admin of FCPS and the Teachers Association, FCTA. There's two other unions that are also involved, but those two were the ones that basically get into a room and discuss how are we going to potentially do this and what would be the guidelines and such. And they have the option of doing either a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, or an SOP, a standard operating procedures. And they basically get in the room and decide whether they're going to do this or not, and they have to come to agreement in order to be able to do that. Then that gets recommended to the Board of Education. The Board of Education is the one that gets to decide whether they're going to pay for it or not. Where's the money coming from? Is this going to be paid for? And all those aspects of it. And they have the final stamp of approval, but they're not actually in the negotiation rooms. So basically, you have the teachers union that is looking out for the good of the Teachers Association. You have the admin who's looking out for the good of FCPS administrators and employees, which also are partially teachers. And there's no one that's sitting there looking out for the best needs of the children. And that's what they all say that they're there for. And that's great that they all say that they're there for. But the reality is that when push came to shove, those cameras got pushed out of the way because what was more important for the admin and the more important for the teachers took precedent, and the parents' concerns and the students' concerns did not take precedent.
And Dustin, what you're pulling the curtain back on, so to speak, in a way that very few people, I think, have been able to do, is what you're describing is you're describing the mechanics of what it is that parents, families, even teachers come to school boards about all over the state and say, why are things like this? Why do we have these policies that are literally harming the teachers, that are harming the students? Where is this coming from? And what you just described is essentially, not in an illegal sense, but a back room. It's official, it's legal, but there's back room dealing. And what is cut out of this back room dealing are the actual elected representatives that we are electing and the presence of families as well. It's simply, let's call them institutionalists, right? Bureaucrats and the teachers union. And so the public and the elected representatives don't have a role in this. And what happens is that you have policies that don't make any sense, like the one you're describing about, that could have prevented what happened to these children, including your son.
So I can add another context to that just to give you as much clarity as possible. So because I actually reached out to the head of the FCTA, and I've spoken to all the board members as far as the cameras in classrooms, because I'm obviously advocating really heavily for these cameras. And after the communication with the new president of CTA, he was the one that alerted me that they were having a meeting already because of the recent allegations and, the parents speaking up, that we kind of had this momentum, that they were having this meeting with FCTA and the FCPS admin. So I knew when it was happening, and it was happening 2 weeks ago. So after that week, when it happened, I directly reached out to one of the administrators for the special needs and said, I'd like to know, who was in that meeting and what occurred, so that I can get an update as far as where we stand on these cameras are concerned. And the response I got was from a Sarah that said, I serve as chief of staff of FCPS. I'm writing a response to your message from Friday regarding your request for information about cameras in specialized program classrooms. I appreciate your interest and attention to our ongoing conversations related to these settings. At the direction of the board and superintendent, we are currently engaged in collaborative discussions with our labor partners about a potential pilot. Because this work remains in a confidential exploratory phase, we are not yet able to share details about meeting participants, provide a debrief, or offer additional information beyond that at this time.
How can
we had a meeting about what you're mostly concerned about, and we can't tell you anything about it.
So they slap a confidential label on it, and that now allows them to not tell anybody anything about the meetings,
about the secret discussions,
even who attended the meetings, because they don't want people to know that it was heavily teachers' unions.
And I'll add one more piece to what you're describing, is that you mentioned that it goes before the board, and then the board can decide to fund it or not. Ultimately, in the end, it is important to keep in mind that the school boards do actually have the decision-making process. Functionally, wait until staff has a recommendation for them, and then they act on that recommendation. They do not have to. However, what ends up happening is that in Maryland, the majority of school board members are teachers union endorsed school board members. So what occurs is that the teachers union goes into these essentially de facto secret meetings, maybe not officially, but in practice, secret meetings. They come up with the policies, and then they tell their endorsed school board members, hey, endorse the policies that we just wrote in these de facto secret meetings. And that, I think, it kind of describes a lot of the full circle of how we have these policies that people are looking at and saying, this is insane. And when they try to look for a deeper reason, a deeper rationale, there is none. It's simply a process that has cut out the best interests of children and parents, and now it's also cutting out the best interest of teachers as well.
Yeah, so after they had promised the pilot, they had these negotiations with the teachers, and the teachers had said they would walk out if, or they would leave the program if they put the cameras behind them. And that didn't mean that they couldn't say bye, see you later. They still had to make the choice. The union said we're not going to allow it because the teachers said they would leave the program. And then the Board of Education, every one of those members that had backed me originally all came out with this nice, really well-written statement at the next Board of Education meeting about how, we have the safest classrooms and this and that, and we trust our, vetting processes, and we'll make adjustments to policies and, and everything, and we'll do a task force, and gave us all this, nice, parting gifts, but no cameras. And they basically, bowed down to what was told to them by the teachers union, that we're not going to do this. And so fast forward 3 years, and we back in September of this year, a John McAleer was arrested at Oakdale Middle School for sexually assaulting multiple children in the Learning for Life program there, the special needs program that's at Oakdale Middle School. And there were allegations last year that I'm aware of in March about John McAleer at Oakdale Middle School that did not make it to the places that they should have. Just stopped it then. He stayed in the classroom all the way through this year. And then when I found out about it, I immediately looked into it because I was pretty sure upon seeing it. And sure enough, he was in my son's classroom at Carroll Manor Elementary School in 2023. He was originally hired in 2023 in the exact same classroom where they were going to do a pilot, which was my son's classroom. And so and those teachers said that they would walk out. Maybe they should have let him walk out. And maybe John McAleer walked out with him. And we never had this problem. Maybe if there was a camera in the room, even if he didn't walk out, he would have not done anything because he was being watched. But lastly, I also went through all of my correspondence with the teacher. And sure enough, in 2023, 3 months after he was in a classroom with my child, I sent a message to the teacher with pictures asking if my son was ever alone with anyone in that classroom that day. And she said she was in meetings all day and she didn't know. And I had pictures of marks on my child. So again, they did not do the right process, go to CPS. If there was cameras in that room, they would have seen what occurred. Either it wouldn't have occurred because he wouldn't have done it with cameras in the room, or it would have been stopped in 2023. This all could have been avoided if they had gone through with the pilot program, if they would have done what they promised me they were supposed to do back in 2023. And when I left, after they said no to the cameras, the last thing I said to them was, we can either lead by example or we can wait until we have egg on our face. And here we are. And that's just the truth of the matter. They failed our children. They failed my child. They failed so many other special needs children. For the last 3 years, this predator has been amongst children that could not speak for themselves. And the first thing that they did is they didn't mention that he was been at Carroll Manor in nonverbal classrooms for the last 3 years. They mentioned that there was an allegation with 2 children at Oakdale Middle School, as if this is some isolated small event. Well, we're dealing with children that could not accuse this person. He's been in a classroom with nonverbal children for 3 years. You think this monster just randomly decided this year to become a monster? I don't think so. Like, they don't want to really tell the truth. And the truth is that we're talking probably more likely 20 to 30 victims of this man, not 2. And it's not going to be a one-off situation. As much as I'd love for this to just be, okay, this was one disgusting monster that, that was an anomaly. It's not. It's not an anomaly. There are a lot of sick people out there. And when you create a scenario with vulnerable children that can't speak for themselves, you're putting a target on their backs. Like, there is a target on these children's backs. And I've mentioned this at the school boards also multiple times. It's why you see the scenarios with the Boy Scouts that had so much problems a few years ago. It's why you see the scenarios with the Catholic Church that had problems. None of these are bad programs, but you're putting children in a situation that a predator is going to seek that out because they're vulnerable and no one's protecting them and there's no accountability in those places. And so the predator seeks it out. You're not going to be able to stop that with policies or human functionalities. No human changes to processes is, the 2 people always with a child in a room. They've been doing that for years. Like, that fails, and it will fail again because people become complacent. And if they don't have anything over their shoulder watching them, they know that there's no one to enforce that policy anyhow. Not just will the cameras help stop it from ever occurring, but they'll also help people actually enforce the current policies that are there. And so that's where we are now, as we have this new scenario with this guy that has been assaulting our children, our special needs children, for the last 3 years, ever since literally the same year that they were supposed to put in that pilot camera program in the same classroom he was hired in.
It's heartbreaking, Dustin, to see what you're going through. And it's just, our heart goes out to you. It's unbelievable that the school allowed a predator into the pen with the sheep that are the most vulnerable, and didn't even do their due diligence to make sure they were protected. As you said, the 2-person policy, it fails all the time, every single day. Somebody has to take a bathroom break. Somebody needs a lunch. Somebody needs something. And it's human nature for that 2-person policy that that the Frederick County Public Schools relies on to break down.
Yeah, no, I mean, for these sick people, it's the one thing on their mind. You're not going to stop them from infiltrating that space. Like those policies will never be good enough. Now the cameras have been proven in every social setting, whether it's in a job placement, whether it's in a school situations, because they've already got cameras in multiple states. Whether it's in public settings, stores. That's why you see those signs in all the places. It says "Smile, you're on camera" when you walk into a convenience store. They've been proven in every setting to reduce crime by 25 to 30%. There was even a survey that was done, or a analysis that was done, that showed that just by putting a pair of eyes, like a painting with eyes on the wall, reduced crime by like 15%. Just the perception of being watched. It's just common sense. People don't typically commit crimes when they know they're being watched. I mean, I don't know why it's that complicated to explain, and why it's that hard to get in place. They're already everywhere else. They're in the hallways, in the cafeteria, in the gyms, on the exterior. They're just not in the places where, teachers would be held accountable.
A few years ago, that most officers definitely resisted the body-worn camera systems that now are prevalent everywhere. Like every police officer carries a body-worn camera. And although the pushback was very definite back then, the result was phenomenal. I mean, phenomenal. Once the officers started wearing the body-worn cameras, they came to the realization that it was one of their best friends, that it allowed them to be safe. It allowed them to tell their story, and I think that most teachers, when they get to the point where they start embracing this, like police officers did the body-worn cameras, they're going to love the fact that they have this check and balance in their classrooms. Now, the major objector is the teachers' unions. And by the way, the teachers' unions have not put children or families first in the last 20 years. I mean, they stopped doing that years ago.
Let's try 40 or
I completely agree that I do believe that the teachers will end up finding these to be their best friends, because it does happen. There are bad situations in the classrooms where these children will be aggressive and will, attack the teacher or the aide or whatever happens. And, there's going to be scenarios where they need to be able to at least reasonably defend themselves from injury, and an injury occurs on the child where they're going to want that video proof that, they were not the aggressor, that they were just trying to, refrain from the situation getting worse. And I can't imagine why any of them. I struggle so hard trying to really process it. And the only logic that I can come through is that it's too hard for them to think about it at the macro level, and that they're mostly all thinking, when you see the responses from the teachers, like, "Oh, if you don't trust me, I'll leave." And that's a very common response, is I feel like this is a lack of trust in the program. And if you don't trust me, I'll leave. And you hear that one a lot. And it's like, it's not about you. It's never been about you. If you're doing your job, your camera will never get pulled. No one will ever come even look at that footage, because it only gets pulled upon an accusation. So the likelihood is they'll never look at your camera. It's not that micro scenario where it's like we're saying that you're doing something wrong. It's the macro scenario that we're saying there are bad people out there, and we need to catch them. We need to catch the John McAleers. We need to not just catch the John McAleers. We need to put something out there that prevents the John McAleers from ever occurring. And if we can do that, then we can protect the teachers, the kids, and everyone involved. And I don't know why anybody wouldn't want that in place.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a moment. One of the things that I would say from a teacher's perspective is that, in order to make an impact, you end up, when you're standing in front of the class, you end up saying things, doing things that aren't wrong, but you're putting yourself out there. You're really stretching to reach this individual, and those could be uncomfortable moments. Now, you do it because you love the process of education and teaching and the growth that occurs as a result, but you're putting yourself out there. you don't necessarily, as a teacher, you don't necessarily want those moments on camera because some of them are awkward. I mean, some of them you don't make the connection. You don't say the right thing. I can see why teachers would say, I don't want a camera in the classroom.
Completely understand. And actually my child's setting is the most common for what you're describing there. Like even my son, so he can get really excited, and when you're engaging with him, you know, he likes to jump up on your lap, especially when he was smaller and it wasn't hurting anyone to jump up on their lap. And, you know, obviously a neurotypical kid jumping up on an adult teacher's lap in the middle of class would not be looked upon as appropriate behavior. But in my son's class, if it helps him learn, if it's engaged, if you've got him engaged and he's going to pay attention to 1, 2, 3 on his talker and be able to answer those questions because he's up on your lap as opposed to in the chair, I'm all for it. Like whatever is going to get him engaged with the study material that's right there. And I can understand that could come off as weird or strange or uncomfortable or inappropriate to some others, where I'd be totally fine with it. But all of those scenarios were built into the laws. And that was where FCPS really failed, in my opinion, back in 2022. So the law says that we had tried to put in place says that the camera can only be pulled in the case of an accusation. And then at that point, it cannot be reviewed by administration during the day. It can't be live streamed anywhere. It's not going to be reviewed for assessments on how the teacher's doing or any type of promotion capabilities. None of that is even allowed at all. So the only scenario it gets pulled is when an accusation has been made. Then when an accusation has been made, a law enforcement officer is allowed to review it for that accusation and that accusation alone. You can't look at it and say, well, I'm reviewing it for this assault charge and Miss Johnson was doing something weird over there in the corner. So let's talk about, like, no, that's off limits. Like the accusation was occurred. We'll look for that. If they see anything regarding that accusation, then administration can be brought in and they can collaborate and find out what needs to be done about what occurred. But if there's nothing that occurs, then no one ever sees it. So the scenarios that you're referring to are just not going to happen. No one's going to see this video unless a significant accusation occurs. And so what happened back in 2022, and this is what I mean by you have the FCPS admin and the SCTA, and neither of them are the ones with the biggest stake as the parents and the children. And they're talking about this pilot for cameras, and they went to ask the teachers, and they sent a survey out to the teachers to say, would you be okay if cameras were in your classroom? And that's all it said. It gave them zero context. It didn't say it would only be reviewed in the case of an accusation, that it couldn't be for assessment on your actual work in the classroom or anything of that nature. Like, it didn't explain at all how those cameras would operate or any of the operating procedures. And so they were all sitting there in the dark with no good answers. And yes, they all put need more information or no, I'm not okay with the camera. Like, if they would have actually took the time to build out a survey that they actually thought would be helpful and useful, maybe they would have gotten responses that would have actually counted and mattered from the real stakeholders. But they didn't. No one cared enough. And I offered during this process, I specifically reached out to them and offered to the superintendent, to the board members, myself multiple times to bring Delegate Guyton on board for language, and sent them copies of House Bill 224 and Senate Bill 725 so that they could see the language and would bring her to the table so that we could get this across. Not one time did they try and collaborate. They just put out this garbage survey with 3 questions. It said, will you be okay with cameras? If not, why? And that was basically it. And you got garbage back, garbage out, garbage in,
So with the revelation of this recent predator operating in the Frederick County public school system for years, have you seen a change in the attitude of the school board members or the administration at all?
Yes. I haven't accepted it They multiple. I've spoken to multiple board members. All of them have said they are all on board now. That every single board member is supportive of the cameras, and they've told me that directly. Like I said before, I had five of the board members and the acting superintendent all supporting me before, and they all turned away after the noise settled down and the teachers union said no. They all just made their nice, real well-spoken speeches at the next board meeting and then just shut it down. So I'm not going to be happy until the cameras are in place. Like, I'm not going to trust it until there's actually cameras in my son's classroom and I can feel safe sending my child to school. Because right now I don't. I have no confidence when I have to put my child, drop him off each day. Now, I am lucky in his current situation. So I will say, I don't want to point fingers. I've had great teachers. I've had some really good teachers. Obviously, I had one awful aide in his classroom, and that's the ones that we're trying to catch. And right now, his current teacher, my son's current teacher, is a friend of my mom's, and one of his aides happens to be one of his former nannies that I had. And so I'm lucky in that scenario that I have people that I know in his classroom right now personally. So I won't say that I don't. But in general, I don't trust sending him to FCPS. I sent him to a classroom for 6 years that I had no idea what was going on, and it turns out pretty bad things were going on inside of that classroom. So,
and not only were bad things going on, but they had knowledge of some of it and didn't keep you informed, which is the right of every parent in the system to know when their children are in danger.
So yeah, I have heard from board members and that they're supportive of the cameras now, but I'm not buying in until I see those cameras in place. When those cameras are in place, and I'm not going to be okay with just let's do a pilot unless that pilot is just for figuring out the operating procedures to expand it. It cannot be a yes or no pilot. If it's a yes or no pilot, then you might as well throw it in the trash, because there is no results from a pilot that would, in my mind, say no. If it catches no one, then maybe it deterred them and it did exactly what we wanted it to do. If it catches someone, then you have proof that would be easier to prosecute. There is no result of the cameras that would not be proof of moving forward. So if they reduce it down to a pilot, it better just be a pilot for figuring out the correct operating procedures to spread it out countywide. And it needs to go into effect before next year's Board of Education primaries. So I'm giving them till the spring in my mind to get it done, to get something in place before I stir the pot some more. And now we are also putting a bill back out there. It sounds like at the state level, a delegate for Howard County, a delegate for Frederick County, or both have interest in putting that bill back in place at the state level. So we'll be working at the state level also.
Well, to give you a little encouragement, Dustin, the entire body-worn camera system started off as a pilot program for different departments. And when the value of it was seen by everybody, it caught on. And now every single department in the country has body-worn cameras.
And that's where that was another thing I explained to the board a few years ago. It's like, 5 years ago, not a state in the country had cameras in these self-contained classrooms. 4 years ago, one had picked it up. 3 years ago, two more had picked it up. 2 years ago, now 5 states have it. Like, you can just see the logic. Like, it's going to be everywhere. It's just a matter of how much egg do you want on your face. Like, it's already a foregone conclusion that we will have cameras. It's just, I want them there before my son's out of school, not 10 years down the road after we've had 5 or 6 incidents and 38 other states have already adopted it, and we become the last state, to make common sense measures go into place. Like, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time of when it does happen.
So, Dustin, how can our audience and parents, how can they help you in this effort?
In the past, I think one of the problems is that an incident occurs and the momentum fades over time. With time, the noise gets a little bit more quiet, and FCPS has been really good at just letting these things fade away. I mean, or the DOJ report that came out in 2022 obviously was big enough to fire a superintendent for, and it had people rattled and a lot of noise and a lot of people upset. But you don't hear people talking about it anymore. They just, wait it out, take the action that's necessary at that moment and let it. We cannot let it slide. The noise and the support has to stay active at the board meetings, with administration, with the Board of Education members. So I'm currently meeting with all of the Board of Ed candidates for next year. And so I also I'm the admin, wasn't the originator, but I am one of the admins of a couple thousand member autism or parents of autistic children in Frederick County group. And so I've collaborated with our group, and we are meeting with all of the candidates and going to kind of put together our recommended candidates for our special needs group, and making sure that they're all very well aware that this is a top issue for us, that this is that this is the number one issue. If you're not on board on this, then we're not going to be supporting you. Obviously, we care about more than just that. But the first step is feeling safe sending your kid to school. If you don't feel safe, I don't care what grades they get. If I can't send them to school safe, like, none of the rest matters. And so that's top of the line for us. So just, being supportive. Don't just look at the messages and let it go by, and, actually speak up, show up to the meetings, let your voice be heard, rally around support. When you hear the information provided regarding the Board of Education candidates that we're recommending for the special needs group, support those and look into it and at least understand why we are supporting them. So just today, for Frederick County Public Schools posted a thing on Facebook saying the Board of Ed was meeting with delegates and Fitzwater about what's most important to our community. And that was one of the posts on the Facebook page. And so what I pointed out to him on a comment, I said, if you could do one thing, every one of your students gets straight A's this year and earns those straight A's. B, every teacher gets a 20% raise. C, every school district gets a brand new school. Or D, you could protect a group of special needs children from being sexually assaulted. You can only choose one. Which one is it? And anyone with any type of conscious on their mind is choosing D. No matter how good A, B, and C might sound to an individual, they're choosing D. So this should be the number one issue talked about. This should be the number one priority in that meeting tomorrow with the Board of Education and Fitzwater and the delegates is, we had a sexual predator amongst us. How do we stop this from ever happening again? Then we can talk about the money. Then we can talk about the schools. Then we can talk about everything else. But this should be the number one priority, because, anyone with a conscience could be able to put that together in my mind. They deleted that post. So they deleted it right off their page. FCPS. FCPS Maryland, or FCPS, I put that question and said, so let's make sure we're prioritizing the most important needs, and they deleted that post. I'm wondering if they'll talk about it at all, or if they're already in the process of hoping that it goes quiet. But
well, I can tell you that there are 3 school board members who will bring it up. They are not going to let it go quiet, and unfortunately, there's 4 other school board members, and that's who makes up the majority. And to your point that, change can occur. What I would point out is that a large part of the reason for that change is because it was the federal government coming along, and they brought some potential legal consequences as well as some potential financial consequences. When it comes to we the people, what I have noticed is that, yes, we can be loud, we can make a fuss for all the right reasons, and it is important. But the thing that really makes the difference, to your point, is that we maintain it all the way to voting day, and we show up and vote at the ballot box. That has an equally, if not an even bigger impact than even the federal government coming in and doing things. So to all the viewers who are interested in supporting you and your endeavors, absolutely keep up the pressure all the way through voting day. And we certainly wish you and your family the very best through all of this.
I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm all the support we can get, especially, like I said, we're taking it back to the state as well. So because these people are amongst us, and we need to protect ourselves from the bad apples, and this is just common sense. So,
Dustin, we appreciate you being here tonight. We definitely appreciate you sharing. I know this is a very painful experience for you, but through your advocacy, I believe that future children, will be safe because of what you've gone through and how you've turned it into a position of keeping them safe. So we appreciate your efforts, and we'll support you 100%.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
That's been this episode of Mid-Maryland Votes. We want to thank Dustin Bane for being here tonight. My name is Mark Flynn, my co-host.
Ethan Lowen.
We thank you for joining Mid-Maryland Votes. This is an important episode to share with your friends, especially if you have children or if you know of children that are going through the Frederick County Public School System. Please share it with as many people as you can. And remember, during the voting process, that some of the candidates will support this and some will not. Pick the right ones. Thanks again for being on Mid-Maryland Votes. Thank you to Dustin Bane. His fight isn't political, it's parental. He's standing up for nonverbal special needs children who cannot tell us when something is wrong and who depend entirely on adults to protect them. When safeguards are refused, silence becomes dangerous and predators benefit. Accountability starts when parents refuse to back down, just like Dustin Bane. Like, follow, and share for more content like this on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. If you loved it, share it with a friend. If you hated it, share it with an enemy. We're equal opportunity entertainment.